If you've ever tried to share your theories about Elden Ring in a public setting, then you may have come across Pareidolia Discourse. Pareidolia is what happens when you perceive meaning in a random visual pattern. For example, you look up into the clouds and the cloud formation happens to look like Waluigi. Or you spread some jam on your toast and the jam happens to look like Waluigi. Or you peer into a dark corner of your room late at night before you go to bed and it's Waluigi. These are just personal examples, but I think you get the idea. Pareidolia is an extremely common phenomena, but when it comes to deciphering fromsoftware games, and particularly Elden Ring, it can be contentious. What happens is someone posts an ambiguous visual that they've perceived as potentially meaningful, and then boom goes the dynamite. The reason for the hostility may seem self-evident. Pareidolia is, by definition, seeing meaning where there is none to see. And especially with a large-scale video game like Elden Ring, it's extremely common for random visual patterns to emerge. Overlapping textures, dynamic lighting, particle systems, all of these variables dynamically interacting with one another. Pareidolia becomes inevitable. Why should we consider what amounts to random visual noise as relevant to a game's underlying narrative design? It's like trying to understand a book based on a coffee stain on one of the pages. But there is a problem with Pareidolia Discourse, which is that oftentimes visual ambiguity and randomness become conflated as though one implies the other. But is that really the case? Does the fact that the visual induces an alternate perception necessarily mean that it's been randomly produced? And hopefully if you watched my previous video, you would agree with me that the answer is no. Visual ambiguity can be designed. Alternate perceptions can be intentionally induced. The truth is, we don't actually know when an ambiguous visual is the result of randomness or design. It's essentially an aesthetic judgment based on what we think is most likely. Ambiguity in general runs so counter to the design philosophy of most video games that disregarding ambiguous visuals as either pareidolia or something unintended is a fairly safe bet to make. But I do think it's worth rethinking our sense of what's most likely when it comes to Elden Ring. I think there's a strong lore-based argument to be made for alternate perceptions being an intrinsic facet of Elden Ring's design. I think if you listen closely, Elden Ring provides plenty of context for viewing built-in alternate perceptions as simply another example of fromsoftware's meticulous environmental storytelling. And that's because the metaphysics of the Lands Between is fundamentally rooted in vision. In fact, the Elden Ring itself might be nothing other than a curated set of visions.
Queen Marika is the vessel of the Elden Ring, carrier of its vision, a god in truth.
The characters that generate mending runes each have a vision of their own, in Fia's case in the form of a dream. Visions are also self-fulfilling prophecies, which we often see in relation to visions of fire. And we often see visions in relation to encounters with outer gods. And it's in those instances where it seems as though Pareidolia is being directly invoked. We find that with the outer god heirloom. We find it in the smithing talisman. We find it in the fingerprint stone shield. And we find it in the schools of magic at Raya Lucaria. When looking at all of these examples holistically, a fundamental distinction between our reality and the reality of the lands between becomes clear. In our reality, phenomena shapes perception. In the lands between, perception shapes phenomena. And so, while in our reality, an alternate perception is a deviation from reality, in the lands between, an alternate perception is an insight. It's a revelation into the phenomena that we are perceiving. Now, does this mean that every single alternate perception that we experience in Elden Ring is intentionally designed? No, that would be impossible, because our visual system really does produce pareidolia, and there's simply no way to account for every single permutation, every single pattern within a video game. And this puts us at a bit of an impasse, because while the game is strongly suggesting that multi-stable designs are integral to the game's underlying lore, the specter of pareidolia makes it extremely difficult to distinguish signal from noise. But my suspicion is that the lore meta of Elden Ring is meant to put us in the role of an occult scientist, or maybe just an early modern scientist, attempting to understand the unknown. And if we look towards the sciences, we can see a variety of methods for dealing with noise. When LIGO first attempted to detect gravitational waves, the signals were buried under massive amounts of environmental and instrumental noise. And the solution to this was to lean into it, essentially. Collect as much data as possible, knowing that some amount of it was noise, and then determining what was signal afterwards using theoretical wave models. I do think that it's possible that if we catalog enough of the ambiguous visuals, while remaining agnostic about whether they are the result of randomness or of design, we may find that a pattern emerges. A narrative structure, perhaps, that's strong enough to distill the signal from the noise. Something precise enough that the odds of it having been randomly produced is untenable. This may be the chain of relations hinted at in the law of causality. So the method that I suggest, if you've ever found yourself contemplating pareidolia-esque imagery in Elden Ring, would be to lean into it. You might call this pareidolia maxing, ambiguity maxing, perception maxing. Gather as many alternate perceptions as you can. Bracket the question of whether it's the result of randomness or of design for now, while also being mindful not to engage in a kind of vulgar analysis where you uncover an alternate perception and form a snap judgment of what it means. And perhaps the most important point is only engage in this if it's a pleasurable activity to engage in. The process of speculating on the more abstract, ambiguous imagery in Elden Ring can be a form of entertainment unto itself. It's the mystery of the gestalt, of how every element of the composition connects. And if you've ever participated in these online forums and you've been shot down by a paratrooper, I just want you to know, like, you weren't wrong to think there might have been significance in what you saw. And if you're someone who disregards pareidoilic imagery and you're highly skeptical of what I'm saying, that's good too. I welcome your skepticism. Wherever you are in this debate, you're really going to want to tune into my next video where I'm going to be perception maxing the skybox above the gate of Divinity. I think I have some really compelling things to show you. Be sure to like and subscribe and join my Patreon, and I'll see you guys then.